Hi, this is Brian with ActiveMelody.com. Well, this week we're taking on the big topic of modes, and this is a follow-up to last week's lesson. Last week was EP374. This week we're going to jump into modes, and I'm going to break down everything I can possibly say about modes from every angle. I'm actually going to show you two different ways to think about them, too. We're going to have the conventional way, and then we're going to connect them back to the good old pentatonics towards the end of this and explain it that way. And so I've got the lesson split into two parts. In this video, we're going to go over all the background information, all the theory. In the second video, I've got two examples, one minor key, one major key, of how to use modes with chord progressions. So I've got that, also I've got those tabbed out. And so you get the jam tracks, the tab for that if you want it. You can get all of this information by going to ActiveMelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP375. All right, so we're going to be doing a deep dive into modes. This is getting into theory a little bit, but I'm going to give you some practical application use for this stuff. And there's a lot of that missing online. I did my homework on this more than I have on many lessons I've done in the past, just to see what other people are saying about them. And they always seem to fall short in one area, and that's explaining how you find them and actually use them. There's just not a lot of information on that. So I'm going to give you that as well. So you're going to have to just kind of bear with me as we start at the top, and we're going to unfold this whole thing, and it's all going to make sense at the end here. So we're going to start with the major scale. So last week's lesson, this is actually part 2 of a little series here. Last week's lesson was part 1, where we go over just the major scale. We didn't get into modes, but I explained what the major scale is and how you play it in all 5 positions. Actually connected the major scale to the caged system, which is kind of a cool thing. So that's EP374, if you want to go back and review that. And what I should have mentioned last week is that there's a formula for the major scale. It's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And some of you are going, what the heck are you talking about? Well, those are just the intervals. If we look on the neck and we look at, we're going to do this in the key of G because that's what we did last week. But if I do whole steps, that's skipping a fret, and a half step is just 1 fret up. So you have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So that's the formula that gives you that major scale. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Every scale that's out there is a series of intervals like that you're going to rearrange them. Sometimes it's whole, half, whole, but that's all scales are. They're just intervals, the distance between those two notes. Now, the other thing, and I know a lot of you know this, but the other thing is that every one of those notes I just played can be a chord as well. So if we're looking at, and I think of that as the chord family, so in this case we're in the key of G, but there's a formula for the chord family as well. So your 1 chord is always major, your 2 chord is minor, your 3 chord is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, and then the 7 is a half diminished chord. But that's the formula for playing the chords in the family of the key that you're in. Now, why am I giving that background information? Well, if you notice in that scale, there were 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then once you come there, you're back to 1. It's just an octave apart now. Same with those chords that we just learned. There were 7 chords. And with the chords, 3 of them were major, and 3 of them were minor. We're going to just leave out that diminished, half diminished chord for this. It's very rarely used, and it's a whole lesson in itself. So let's look at it this way. We have 3 major chords, 3 minor chords. The same is true when we come to modes. Now we're going to connect modes to those chords. There's 3 major modes and there's 3 minor modes, and they correspond to the chords in the chord family. So here's the list of modes. They come in this order, so you have to know them in this order. Now, modes have these weird names, but the first one is called Ionian, and it's just the major scale. Ionian mode is the major scale. The second one is called Dorian, and then we get into the third one, which is Phrygian, then Lydian, then the 5th one is Mixolydian, and then we're on to Aeolian. Aeolian is just the minor scale. So you already know 2 of the modes. It's just the major scale and then the natural minor scale. And then the 7th one is called Locrian or Locrian. I think I'm saying those right. But anyway, those are, the names are irrelevant. They're not like a clue as to anything that's going on. They're all Greek names and they've been around forever. But all I really think about is the numbers. And so you have to kind of memorize, when I say Dorian, you have to think 2. Because what will happen is if somebody says, hey, we're going to be playing this in D Dorian, well, that means they're playing in a minor key and you're using the Dorian scale. So that's kind of the order of modes. All right, so we have all the background information out of the way. Let's talk now about music, and let's talk about the feelings that modes are designed to create. There are 7 modes, and they give you 7 different feelings. 3 of them are happier, and the happier end of the spectrum. Those are your 3 major modes, the first, your fourth, and your fifth mode. The second, third, and the sixth mode are kind of sad, and even get into kind of weird. If you want to get really weird, you get into Locrian, that's why I leave that one out. It's just too weird for me. I don't really even understand how to use it. But those 6 modes give you those different emotions. So the first mode, if you want the happiest, the most positive, almost like classical music, you go with the first mode, which is Ionian. All right, so now let's get into the second mode, which is Dorian. That's one of my favorite modes because it's so useful, and it really has more of a bluesy feel. To me, it's kind of a bluesy minor key thing. It's serious, but it's not super dark, and a lot of people associate that with Carlos Santana. It's kind of that Santana feeling, but let's take a look at Dorian. And then we get into the third mode, which is Phrygian or Phrygian. And I don't like this one because to me it's just kind of odd. It just is unsettling. It's taking the Santana mode and it's darkening it a little too dark for me. But let's take a look at Phrygian. All right, so now we move on to Lydian mode. I love this mode because it's kind of got that David Gilmour vibe. It's happy because it's in the major family, but it's kind of spacey, and especially if it's played really slow. It's kind of a little bit unresolved. Cool mode. So now we have one of the most useful modes, in my opinion, and that's Mixolydian mode. I think of Jerry Garcia when I think of this mode. A lot of jam bands kind of into this thing. It's the major scale, but with just a little bit of blues sprinkled into it. All right, so now back to the minor modes. We have Aeolian. It's just the natural minor scale. So to me, it's sad. It's one of the saddest of all the modes. And lastly, we have the oddball, which is Locrian. Here's me attempting to play something in Locrian. You can see how odd it is. All right, so what were we just looking at there with all of that? Well, everything I was playing was in the key of G. It was played over a G, single note G in the bass, a single note of G in the keyboard. And I picked a single note for a reason, and it's because there's no definition really. There's no chord underneath it. It's just a note. And so I can react to that note with any of those modes and pull that note into any of those different vibes that I want. That's what's cool about modes. It's like I'm in control of shifting the song here. In this case, only when there's a single note. Now, I'm going to show you what it sounds like when there's a chord, and even when there's a series of chords. It's more of a real scenario anyway. But I wanted to just use that as an example so that you can hear the different modes all played in the key of G. So every one of those modes were played in G. That was G Dorian, G Lydian, etc. All right, so now that we have all that background information about how the modes feel, let's talk about how you find them. And this is where it all starts to break down for people. And I'm going to try my best to make this as clear as I can possibly do without making any assumptions. And I'm going to show you two ways to do it. So if one of the ways doesn't resonate with you, hopefully the other one will. The second way we're going to learn this is to connect it to the pentatonic scales, scales you already know. That way requires a little bit of memorization because you're going to have to memorize which extra notes you add to the pentatonics. But this first way is more of a formula that you can use to pull out that information anywhere, anytime you need it. So I like both, but let's start with the first one. So we're going to start with the G major scale. Everything we're going to be doing here is in G. Now those were 7 notes that I just played. And the way that I first had the modes explained to me was if I start on the 1, so that would be 1 is Ionian, and so because in our chart there, right, 1 is Ionian, so that's the major scale. If I start on the second interval in that same group of 7 notes, the same G major scale, that would be, it has a totally different feel. Actually, I didn't believe that when I first heard that. I'm like, there's no way that's the G major scale. It actually is. I'm just starting on the second interval, the second note there. And so that would be considered Dorian. And that's where most people leave it. But what they don't tell you is that's not G Dorian, that's A Dorian, because we're starting with an A note. So then if I move on to the third, which is a B, right? That would be B Phrygian, not G Phrygian. That's where I was confused. I thought that all of this was just, you know, if I just wanted to play G Dorian, for example, I just go to the second interval and play at the scale. And that's the breakdown. That's not how it works. So what that means then is, hopefully you're starting to figure this out. Oh, okay, so if I wanted to play G Dorian, I need to find where G is the second interval. What scale is G the second interval? Because Dorian is 2, right? Hopefully you're with me on that. This is the most confusing part of this whole thing when you're following this formula, is you have to work backwards. It gets faster as you do it, but where is G the second interval? And the way that I do that is I go back to that first formula that I showed you, the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, that formula for the major scale. So if I know that formula is true of the major scale, and I know that I want G to be the second, I can start with this G. So what would be the first? Well, I go back a whole step. Because remember, the formula is whole, whole, half, right? Whole, 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 half. Now notice that sounded different because I started on an F note. So what I found then was, if I'm playing in the key of F, the 2 is the G, right? So that means if I play the F major scale now, I will be playing in G Dorian. That's the big breakthrough. It took me forever to figure that out. So if I want that G minor kind of Santana vibe, I can just play the F major scale. And last week, remember I showed you how to play the major scale in 5 positions? Well, we learned it in G. But you can easily transpose that and play that in any key because I connected it to the cage system. So now if you want to play the F major scale, you just find your position for it. And you can find it anywhere on the neck that you want to do it. But any of those notes that I play are going to be G Dorian. Let me give another example. Some of you are going, what? I don't get this. All right, let's go on. Let me just give another one here. So let's say we want to play in G Mixolydian. That's a classic, kind of jam band thing. Jerry Garcia. So Mixolydian is the 5th mode, right? So I need to find where G is the 5. What is G the 5 of? Well, let's take this G up here. It's an octave higher because we have to work backwards, remember? So remember that formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if I walk it backwards, it's whole, half, whole, whole. Remember? So and then you can double test, you can check it. So if that's the note, we're going to say whole, whole, half, whole. There's our G. Whole, whole, half. Now what scale did I just play there? What is that note? That's a C. So I played the C major scale, and sure enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth interval in the C major scale is G. So that means, using the thing we just talked about, if I play the C major scale over that G note in that jam track, I will then be playing in G Mixolydian. Let me demonstrate this, and I'll put on the jam track here so that we can you can at least hear what I'm talking about. All right, so I have the jam track going, and notice it's just a single note. We're going to be playing on top of a single note and reacting to that. No chords just yet. But I'm going to play the C major scale, and I want you to hear what it sounds like on top of that. So we have this. Not horrible, but it still doesn't sound quite right. If I kept going with it, it would sound better. What makes it really work is for me to start on the G note of that scale. So I just find the G, this note. Now if I play the same C major scale starting on this note, hear what it sounded like? It's sounding like G Mixolydian. Now you can feel that vibe. I'm still just playing the C major scale though. All right, so that's how that works. Now I want to quiz you and see if you can follow along here. This will be kind of fun. And it takes a little bit of time to work it out. It's okay. Right now we're just working out the formula and seeing if we can do it even on paper. It's fine. But what I want you to do is try and find G Aeolian mode. Now that I've given you all that information, pause the video and see if you can work out the formula to find G Aeolian. Remember, Aeolian is the sixth interval. So the question you have to ask yourself is, in what scale is G the sixth note? All right, so using our whole half formula, I worked it backwards and I came up with this note, which is a B flat. And you can double check it just by counting it up. So let's play the B flat major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And look at the sixth note. That's a G. So what that means is if I want to play in if I want to play in G Aeolian, which is just the G natural minor scale, I can actually play the B flat major scale, and it's going to work. Just remember to always emphasize the G note when you're playing the scale, and that's how it works. And over time, that becomes a lot easier. All right, so I know in my years of experience in doing this that some of you are totally with me and like, yes, I got it. And some of you are like, even more confused than when you started. Well, let me show you another way to find these modes, and this way is got a little bit of memorization, but in some ways it can be easier because we're going to be working off the pentatonic scales, which as guitar players we know and love. So we're going to be playing in the key of G, same key, and we're going to start with the G minor pentatonic scale. We'll start with pattern 1, which sounds like this. Okay, so that's the G minor pentatonic scale. And in the pentatonic scale, there's 5 notes. Penta means 5. If we want to convert that, now remember, so let me just start with this. There's minor pentatonic scale, there's major pentatonic scale. Hopefully you're starting to connect things. Wait a minute, there was 3 minor modes, 3 major modes, right? So we want to put our minor modes, or 3 minor modes, connect those to this minor pentatonic scale, and the 3 major modes we're going to connect to the major pentatonic scale. So all we have to do is add 2 notes each time to that minor pentatonic scale to convert it into the mode. And I'm going to start with G Dorian. So how do I convert the G minor pentatonic scale into G Dorian, that Santana kind of vibe thing? We're going to add the following 2 notes. There's one. There's the other one. So and that's easy to see because it's like a little pattern here. You have 6, 5, 3, 6, 5, 3. And then we just keep it going. We're going to keep playing down the minor pentatonic scale. We're going to add it again here. And then we're going to add it again here. So now we have this pattern. We have 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 3, 5, 6, 3, 5, 6. And that is the G Dorian mode. It's really just the G minor pentatonic scale with those two extra notes. There it is again on the 5th fret 6th string. All right, so you can relate all these back to the pentatonics like that. Just remember, if you're doing minor pentatonics, you would use the minor modes and then major pentatonics for the major modes. The other way you can do it is to connect it to the major scale or the minor scale. If you already know those, then you've got all 7 notes. You're just readjusting a few of them. That's another way. That may even be easier. So there's different ways you can look at this stuff. But let me just say this when it comes to the modes. There's 7 of them, but there's really 4 that I use. You know, even though I would say Lydian is sometimes I go there, but most of the time it's the Ionian mode, which is the major scale. It's the Aeolian mode, which is the minor scale. You probably already know those two. Dorian, which I just showed you, and then the other one is Mixolydian mode, which I love. In fact, here's a really easy way to remember Mixolydian mode. It's just the G major scale, but you flat the 7th interval. Really? That's all there is to it. You just flat one note, and you're playing in G Mixolydian mode. Now, I showed you that big formula where we worked backwards and we were playing in C major. All of that was really just generating these 7 notes. It just depends on how you want to look at it. I wanted to give you the whole history of modes, though, so that you can understand kind of where they're coming from, and you can work them out yourself using that formula. All right, so everything we've been playing so far has been a reaction to a single note, and that's great for demonstration purposes, but what about in a real world scenario? We have chords when it comes to a band. So a band would be playing like a full G chord or a G minor chord. It's not going to necessarily just be playing a single note. So here's the general rule. If it's just a single note like that, you can play any of the 7 modes you want and totally shape it however you want. You are in control in that situation. There is no real foundation. Same is true if you're playing the root and the 5th of a chord. Remember, a chord is made up of the root, or the 1, the 3, and the 5. You can take the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the major scale that I just showed you there, and that is your major chord. The 1, the flat 3, you just flatten the 3rd, and the 5 is your minor chord. That's the formula for major and minor chords. So what I just said then, if you have the 1 and the 5, there is no 3 there, so the 1 and the 5 means it can be either major or minor. The 3 is what determines major or minor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 3 notes, you can hear that's a G, right? If I flat the 3rd, it's a G minor. So that 3 determines, is it major or is it minor? So what that means is if you have a major chord, you can only play the major modes, those 3 major modes. And if you have a minor chord, you can only play the 3 minor modes. So again, that was something nobody ever explained to me. You cannot play Dorian if it's a major chord. It's not going to work. Even though you might be playing G Dorian and it's a G chord, it's not going to work unless it's a G minor. Just remember this, if you know your pentatonics, you already know 5 of the 7 notes of the modes. And so as long as you know when and where to use a major or a minor pentatonic scale, you're already more than 70% of the way there. You've got 5 of the 7 notes. So it's just those other 2 notes, and believe it or not, all this discussion about mode is just those 2 extra notes that we're using in our soup to give it some extra flavor. That's what all the fuss is over modes. All right, so your next question is, what about a song that's got multiple chords? Not just a minor chord or a major chord, but a series of chords. That's what a song is, right? Well, I'm saving that for the part 2 video. That's for premium members, where we're going to go over 2 examples. One will be a major chord progression, the other will be a minor chord progression, and how do I work in a mode over those chord progressions. So we're going to cover that in the part 2 video. If you're not a premium member, join us. There's all this information that I'm putting out, and I do it every week, and if you really want to be a better guitar player and understand how it all works, I'd encourage you to look into it. It's super affordable, and it's just a really good family to join. We have an active community on the forums, and it's just an awesome place to be if you're a guitar player. All right, we'll see you in part 2.